I was born while Ronald Reagan was president, and some of my earliest memories are of our quick victory in Desert Storm and of the Cold War, which shaped the lives of everyone in my parents' and grandparents' generations, suddenly ending with the collapse of the USSR. Like a lot of kids who grew up in the 90s, I was raised in the shadow of American global supremacy. Everything from the media to the music to the history books told us the same story. We were the good guys. Our country was unstoppable, and the future was ours. Good guys and bad guys seemed simple back then. When Indiana Jones punched a Nazi, I thought we were all cheering. As a white kid growing up in suburban New York, someone whose grandfather and granduncles all fought in World War II, and having met my friends' grandparents who had tattoos on their forearms, having survived concentration camps, it never occurred to me that any American might side with the Nazi in those Indiana Jones movies. That kind of evil felt foreign, distant. But flash forward 30 years, we're living in a country where the American president and the political appointees he's installed throughout the federal government openly sympathize with white nationalist movements. And they're performing overt stunts like putting racist and fascist slogans on podiums where cabinet secretaries speak to the press. In 2026, we live in a country where neo-Nazi talking points are echoed by senior White House officials like Stephen Miller, who built policy around white nationalist ideology, and where elected officials use the same language and tactics that fascists once used to consolidate power in Europe. And the bad guys we've been trained to fear, they were mostly brown. In the 90s and the decade that followed, Arab, Muslim. Their names, their clothes, their accents, those were the markers that defined them as enemies. Not any particular government of enemies, just them. Back then, the future felt fast and bright, though. Computers and the internet were going to connect us, make the world smaller and more cooperative. Peaceful. It was a story we wanted to believe. There was no hostile peer nation, no existential threat anymore like we had during the Cold War. Just small groups of terrorists that we could fight over there so we don't have to fight them here. But that illusion shattered on September 11, 2001. Bin Laden's attacks didn't just knock down buildings, they collapsed the myth of American invulnerability, of American greatness. In response, our country lashed out. We invaded and occupied, tortured and detained. We created the global war on terror. We built a 21st century empire of violence. And we lied to ourselves the whole way through. Some Americans saw our hubris for what it was and began to question what we were doing. Others were thoroughly addicted to that old feeling of American exceptionalism. They couldn't handle losing it. They were experiencing withdrawal. They needed someone to blame, and they found it in other Americans. The war that started in Afghanistan ended up being waged in Tea Party town halls, on right-wing talk radio, and in the fever swamp of social media where conspiracy theories became reality for tens of millions of Americans. The enemy stopped being foreign. It became domestic. And in that turn, a movement like MAGA could only flourish, not despite our history, but because we've never reckoned with our history. Now, nearly a quarter century later, we have generations of young people who feel like their future was stolen. They've been told that other Americans betrayed them, sabotaged the country. And they're guided by what they see as righteous anger, fueled by the promise to, quote, make America great again. But here's the thing. There's no single moment we can point to and say, that's when it all went wrong. As we've discussed with historians on this show, this has always been part of who we are. The United States was built with deep flaws, and while we like to define ourselves by our optimism, maybe it's that same optimism that keeps us from sitting with the truth. Reckoning is painful, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. If we want to stop pretending everything's fine, if we want to survive this crisis, we need to name the cancer trying to kill our body politic and cut it out. Which brings me to Dr. Nola Haynes. As a trained political scientist specializing in international relations, Dr. Haynes brings academic precision and policy experience to every conversation. She specializes in arms control and international security, offering sharp and accessible foreign policy commentary rooted in deep expertise. A former member of the U.S. Department of State's International Security Advisory Board and Georgetown University faculty, she navigates elite spaces with credibility while always staying grounded in her Southern roots from New Orleans, making her equally at home on cable news panels and community forums. Dr. Haynes is not only a thought leader, she's also a witness to history and a shaper of the future. She doesn't just comment on global affairs, she lives and shapes them. She trains future diplomats. She's been in the rooms where policy is made and power is exercised, and she hasn't been afraid to speak up when it matters. Dr. Haynes knows what responsible leadership looks like because she's fought for it, and she's watched it falter under the weight of political theater and cowardice. So here's the question we're asking in this episode. Is America a superpower in name only? Can we recover from this if we stop repeating the same mistakes and finally hold accountable the people sabotaging our democracy on the world stage? As we've discussed in previous episodes, America has consistently failed to hold accountable traitors and saboteurs, Confederates and insurrectionists. Our instinct to take the high road or turn the other cheek has only allowed those forces to recover from losses, grow stronger, and stretch their agenda across generations. So if we do go after Trump and his regime, what does real accountability actually look like? Let's get into it. Dr. Nola Haynes, thanks for being with me. Welcome to On Offense. I wanted to talk to you in this moment because we are seeing things that I feel are connected, but I don't really have a good way of explaining how they are. And that is things like the kidnapping of Maduro, the American takeover of Venezuela, and this recent murder of a woman who was driving a minivan in Minnesota by an ICE agent. Can you help our listeners understand how these types of things, how foreign policy and domestic policy, particularly as it relates to the use of force in military and policing, are connected?
That is a great question. It is a big question that I'm going to answer very simply. We are seeing a convergence of both. You know, they've always interconnected, right? Like folks like me who specifically study and have backgrounds in national security and foreign policy specifically is because they've always, worked in tandem. But what we are seeing is something that I just call very simply, it's Trump policy. And Trump policy is bullish. This idea of deterrence first, a complete abandonment of diplomacy, right? We are going to be the bull outside of Wall Street, right? We're going to embody that and just be the wrecking ball of the world, completely abdicating all of, people complain about us being the cops of the world. This iteration, I am not at all impressed at all. I'm actually disgusted, if I'm being honest with you. Yeah.
When we have on American streets a secret police force snatching people up, murdering people, with the full backing of the White House. At the same time, we've got a White House that is violating our own laws, international laws, treaties, and going and kidnapping a head of state. How do we recover from this on the world stage? Can you tell me what Putin and Xi are seeing right now and what we should expect of them, not just during the remainder of the Trump presidency, but beyond?
So this is a question that I spend way too much time thinking about these three men, Kris. It's just probably not healthy. But if I am Putin, so let me start here. So for many of us who watch this stuff very closely, we know that Trump-Putin relationship they're not besties, right? Probably frenemies, and I don't even know if they're that, right? Mm-hmm. So the bit of a wild card here is Putin. She stands to gain everything. You know, she has stepped into the diplomatic space that we've abdicated, right? Mm-hmm. And Russia and China has an advantage because they've been in Latin America, they've been in Africa in a way that we just haven't been, you know, and we're talking about our neighbors, right? So part of this is also this kind of push and pull between the three that are realigning themselves, repositioning themselves, and our posture is deterrence first, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm Putin and I still have, you know, Ukraine to worry about, right? I am trying to manipulate Trump as much as I possibly can, right? So Putin is in a very interesting place with all of this because there are still things that he needs out of Trump. Mm-hmm. And Trump, he kind of like whatever the headline that he hears about that angers him the most is what he's going to respond to, right? So he is very impulsive in that way. And Kris, I'm one of those people, like I like to stay in my lane of expertise. I am not a therapist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. So I kind of stay away from the dementia debate about mm-hmm. him. But something wrong.
I think that most people agree with you.
I don't need a PhD in psychology to tell me that a president who gets up and wanders in mid-cabinet meeting to go look out the window.
Yeah. So how do we recover from this on the world stage? Because it was the first Trump presidency, in my opinion, that gave Putin the green light to do a full-scale invasion against Ukraine.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Trump presidency alone, mm-hmm. but Trump did give Putin 4 years of space. He also elevated him on the global stage in terms of the respect that he gave him, the opportunities that he gave to Putin to platform his disinformation, his propaganda. If there's, you know, a massive swing towards the Democrats in the 2028 elections, in 2029, do we recover? Can we recover? The way that I think about this type of thing, whether it's domestic policy or foreign policy, is in order to build a house, you need an architect. You need to, you know, follow the codes. You need a plumber. You need a HVAC technician. You need carpenters. You need masons. And this, you know, the building of a house takes at least months, right? But to burn it down, all you need is one asshole and a match, right? You don't need much more than that. The energy that has to be expended to destroy something is so minimal compared to its creation. How do we recreate, or can we recreate our moral leadership on the global stage, however flawed that may have been in the past? How do we at least convince our allies, our adversaries, and everybody else that America is not bipolar in its political leadership?
Accountability. I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of Germany and World War I. and how Hitler was able to rise to power. You know, one of the reasons being that the bill from World War I was so immense that there was just no way for Germany to pay it back, and poverty was just intense, and it was a ripe situation for his personality. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think about that in the context of what we're dealing with today. What will be the cost we will have to pay down the line, right? Because you can't escape breaking the world, Kris, destroying the entire international system, mm-hmm. and threatening war with your NATO ally. That's going to cost. So how do we show up in good faith? We have to hold ourselves accountable in a way that's going to continue to hurt, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. We have to hold this country accountable for allowing that to happen. And, you know, I'll go as far as to say, I understand why presidents make certain decisions that they make. You know, why Nixon was pardoned. If it comes to a situation like that, that would send a very strong message if the next president did not pardon Trump. We have to hold ourselves accountable in a way to show the rest of the world that, yeah, we effed up big time, and we have to work to earn your trust, and we have to start with ourselves. And one of the things we have to do, Kris, we have to do a deep, deep psychological dive, because one of the ways in which this country has been able to be fractured, it's a reason why Trump started with DEI. It's a reason why he started with race. It's our most vulnerable point.
Yeah, and that is something that Americans, I mean, I remember seeing on television the talking heads saying that we live in a post-racial era in 2008.
Oh, yeah.
In 2009. Between 2015 and 2020, when I was working for Vietnam Veterans of America, I was on their government affairs and policy staff. And naturally, being one of the resident millennials in an organization by and for people in their 70s, I was helping out comms and social media. And I found an imposter Facebook account made to look like my employer, Vietnam Veterans America. Long story short, it was the Russians. I came back, you know, I showed my initial findings to my boss, and he told me, okay, you're now the chief investigator of Vietnam Veterans America. And I used to joke that I'm the first and last investigator of any veterans organization ever. Now I run an organization of veteran investigators. And he gave me the limits of it had to be outside the United States. Threats, disinformation, cyber threats had to be from outside the United States, because if I focused inside the United States about cyber threats and specifically around disinformation and division, it would have been a report about Donald Trump, and half of our members would have freaked the fuck out. So one of the most consistent things that I saw, whether it was the Russians or any of the countries within their sphere of influence that had troll farms that were targeting Americans, or African or Asian fake accounts that were pretending to be Americans, was race, was one of the issues that was always exploited. That could be to promote racism explicitly, you know, pitting veterans against undocumented immigrants with slogans like "veterans before illegals," or it could be a Black Vietnam Veterans Monument, a true story, was vandalized, and this Russian-backed imitator of my employer would take a story like that, a true story from rural Massachusetts, and they'd replay it over and over and over again to make people think that it's urgent, that it's happening right now. So the world understands that our racial animus that exists within the DNA of this country is one of our greatest weaknesses. With what Donald Trump is doing right now with ICE, do you think that we are going to reach a point where something like a Truth and Reconciliation could be accepted in the United States? Because I think that previously, no, there's
right.
no way. But I think the visceralness that people who are unaffected, suburban white people like me, totally unaffected, in my day-to-day life by anything like this. I think that more people might be interested in that kind of thing. Do you get that sense, or am I being too optimistic?
No, honestly, Kris, if you presented that to me as a research paper, I would love that. Like, seriously, it's a great question. I think you're onto something. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of mood shift, right? Because we've had a decade of Trump where we've wanted accountability. Mm-hmm. And will our current court system get it done the way that it exists, right? Because it also needs a come to Jesus moment. There are many institutions in this country that need come to Jesus moments, right? But that could be an interesting model. I think people, to your point, it does feel like the energy is there. Mm-hmm. And because we're talking about a regime, this is the Trump regime, right? It's not just Trump. It's Millard. It's Bannon. It's the shadow Secretary of State, Jared Kushner. It's the Secretary of State. It's Pete Hegseth. It's Noam. It's the whole cabal. And people are going to want some sort of accountability and reconciliation. I think it's a great question.
Do you, as Americans, we are used to global supremacy. Everyone alive today has lived in America, where we are the world's greatest superpower, yeah, or uber power, beyond superpower, especially when you add, the cyber and space tech capabilities that we have nowadays. And we've seen Russia just absolutely fucking destroyed by Ukraine, that I think had something like the 18th largest force in the world. So we are used to this this status of being untouchable. Do you think that in the future, accountability is going to need to be not only from within, but the United States is going to have some sort of foreign involvement in accountability? I'm thinking things like, we haven't signed on to the International Criminal Court. They have no jurisdiction when it comes to the United States. But do you think that it is going to be international organizations like that have to or can be involved in accountability moving forward? Or do you think that this idea of supremacy that is several generations baked into the American ethos, do you think that any sort of outside cooperation or involvement would be a bridge too far?
It goes back to, I absolutely 1000%. When I say this is going to cost us, I was speaking globally, right? Like we're going to have to dig deep. And, what I see is one of the costs, we will have to do what Great Britain did, and it's fine. There's been this conversation for years in the political science community about, would it be so bad if we're not a superpower? Probably not. We'd be the richest, non-superpower ever. What do you care about most? So we are taking I know that the Trump regime thinks that this bullish posture is going to make the entire world bow down, like, as juvenile as that is. But it's not going to work. It's already backfiring. I wouldn't want to test going into Greenland. I'm just saying. Mm-hmm. I don't. Europe is not going to bow down. I just need your audience to know that right now.
Can you? I want to explore that a little bit. Could you tell me why it is, at least for my media diet, has shown me that Europe has had kind of a tepid response to the kidnapping of Maduro? I frankly feel kind of surprised that there wasn't global condemnation. Like, I understand that Maduro was a dictator. He was not a good dude. He was disappearing people. He had secret police. He is in many ways like Donald Trump. The only difference is, an additional, I don't know, eight years in power. Did Europe lose a chance to be on the right side, or am I too biased in my thinking about what happened in Venezuela?
European leaders definitely did speak out. They did. There's actually quite a list of them that spoke out. One of the reasons why I wasn't loud is because, mainstream media they're not going to amplify that, first of all. Mm-hmm. And secondly, this situation in Greenland, all of it is connected, right? So what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Greenland, everything that is happening right now is all interconnected in a way that I've never quite seen before, historically speaking. And what I mean by that is we are the agitators of all of these different things that are sparking off around the world, right? Mm-hmm. That is a very unique kind of situation to be in. And because of that, we're not only just kind of upsetting the status quo of the system, which many people would argue, and I'm with them, Kris, needed an overhaul. What we're seeing right now, this is beyond the pale. Just like with Trump's travel bans in 2017 and 2020, which was an extension of an Obama policy that Trump threw over the, he just went really, really overboard with it. But anyway, the cost is going to be intense because we are agitating a lot of things around the world. And that is messing with people's money. That's messing with people's safety. It's messing with people's sovereignty. You can't just do that mm-hmm. and think nothing is going to happen. So we might just have to be okay with maybe not being a superpower. Because when I say China has stepped into the world stage in a way that we haven't fully seen the complete impacts of yet.
What do you think it's going to take for the average American who, isn't immersed in policy and politics to understand the impact that Donald Trump is having on the world stage? And I'm not just talking about MAGA, who, likes to repeat the line that we're finally respected on the world stage, when everyone saying that is someone who has never been overseas. What's it going to take, not to wake up MAGA, but to wake up the kind of middle of the country who foreign policy, unless they've got unless they've been in the military or they have a friend in the military, they don't think about on a day-to-day basis. Like, what's going to be the wake-up call? Is there going to be a wake-up call?
I've gotten this question in different forms over the years. And I think it's different for everyone. I think that moment comes differently. You know, we're already seeing a lot of folks who regret their vote. And it wasn't just one reason. You know, it was in the list of things that has happened in barely a year, right? I don't think there's going to be like this big punctuated equilibrium moment. Maybe something in the Epstein files, and what I've seen so far this weekend that's floating around on social media about these files, which is horrific and disgusting. Like, I don't even want to go there. Have you seen what I'm talking about?
I have not seen the latest.
Kris, the latest is that there's snuff films in the Epstein files.
Oh, Jesus.
This is where we are right now as a country. This is the conversation on social media this weekend about the sitting American president.
Yeah, I hope, and I think you could be right, that the Epstein files is like the one thing that is breaking through. But on the same sense, I think that maybe I'm just so jaded that I don't know. I'm not confident in the average American to suddenly wake up and care, even if it is horrifying, even if it is, even if the injustice against other people is so clear. I think that I am thoroughly convinced. I truly believe that until individual Americans feel pain in their own lives, that it is unlikely for them to become engaged, whether that means voting or something else, but to become engaged at all. But they're feeling it, and they're still justifying it, right? They're still trapped in that kind of cultish thinking where you continuously justify your actions. Even when you're seeing the thing, you're hearing the thing, you've been programmed not to trust your own ears and eyes. Mm-hmm. And you've bought so far into this. This is kind of more of specifically about MAGA. I think that I've always said there will be people who will break away from MAGA, but I think the diehards are the diehards, period. Mm-hmm. I think that there will always be kind of like a healthy percentage of MAGA in this country. And I am one of those who believe that we are kind of talking about the same kind of sort of folks going all the way back to the founding of this country. Those sort of folks have always been with us here in this country, that existed more on the fringes, but now they have, they've been normalized in a way that they haven't been in a very long time, right? So that's going to be with us. But to your point about everyday Americans, yes, they're going to have to feel the pain, and it's going to have to hurt deeply, unfortunately. Until something happens horrifically to a person who has a different worldview from you, that, like you said, that's typically the motivator, and that's pretty unfortunate. I think what happened to Renee Nicole Good, who was murdered in Minnesota by the ICE agent, the way that this has been portrayed by the White House and specifically by J.D. Vance, because he actually got on stage and talked from a podium at length about this. Yes, he did. I think that what they are trying to do, and they are doing quite effectively, if you look at the other side of the algorithm, right? If you consume right-wing content, they have made this woman who was murdered a ripe target because of her identity. I think that the reason that J.D. Vance put forward the video that the murderer took from his perspective, the reason why they released that was not because it showed that that the vehicle looked like it was a danger to the ICE agent. In fact, it did the opposite. But it was because it was the first close-up view that most of the public got to see of the victim and her wife, and the fact that they were visibly queer. I think that it was their physical presentation that, in the mind of J.D. Vance and everyone that follows him, that because of the way that they presented these queer identities, made them deserving of murder. And I think that is a new stage that we've reached. I don't know, and this is ignorance. Well, what I was going to say is I don't know that a lynching has ever been so strongly defended from the White House. I mean, there's Chauvin and the murder of George Floyd. That was something that MAGA really leaned in on, but this one feels different to me because the gaslighting hasn't been specifically personal at the victim, demonizing the victim, but I think it has been more indirect in that the White House is trying to paint the entire left, all Democrats, as domestic terrorists in the way that Hitler did, in the way that Mussolini did, in the way that Gaddafi did. Am I off here? Is that what's going on?
We're definitely in an escalated phase of the weaponization of identity. It's always existed. To your point, so part of my intellectual background, you kind of can't really be a Black person in this country without understanding the racial history. And so while in my lived experience, you will hear Black folks say things like, none of this is new, in terms of the government being turned on you because of your identity. There's a laundry list in this, of folks in this country that have experienced that. What is unique, and what, I'll just go ahead and say it. What is unique is that her whiteness is less important than her queerness. That's the uniqueness of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because the government targeting people based on identity, that's nothing new about that. This iteration of state police, that is also another unique feature, of this. But we are in a new phase of this when it's okay to shoot a white woman in her face, to kill her, to murder her, mm-hmm. because she's gay. That's wild as hell, Kris. That's a very unique stage of this.
Yeah. My most recent job, work, and I don't get to do the investigations that I used to. It's not the way my life is working right now, but I spent a lot of time, doing things like tracking mass shooters and the spread of their propaganda. We have seen a proliferation of these kind of meme-inspired shooters, or shooters who use memes as a means to communicate. Many serial killers, or many people who engage in mass murder, are iterating. They are communicating with one another. They are leaving Easter eggs for people who are ideologically similar, whether it be racist, misogynist, or whatever their primary motivating factors are. As pessimistic as I am from all of that work, of reading these manifestos, of watching people share these manifestos and these videos online, and as pessimistic as I've grown from all of that, I don't think that I anticipated the Vice President of the United States and, official government Twitter accounts in many ways sharing the same kind of propaganda, in many ways sharing the same kind of ideology. And I want to kind of go back to a question I asked before about this, like, international involvement. Do you think it would be appropriate for international prosecutions against ICE agents for things like unnecessary use of force, for citizens who are deported and returned to their home countries? Is that even possible? Is there a world that exists where ICE agents are held accountable by other governments, or is the only choice prosecution from within the United States?
I don't know how much legal cover this administration has given ICE agents. I haven't seen any updated DHS policies. I know that I can't remember, I'm blanking on the very specific laws, but the law does protect law enforcement, and we can get into the minutia of ICE not technically being law enforcement.
Yeah, that qualified immunity.
Yes. So, but there's a lot of murkiness around this issue and certain protections, right? So I don't know to what level of protection this administration has given them. So I don't know what sort of diplomatic agreements exist or don't exist, where they can go into other countries and perform duties. Are they protected to perform those duties in those other countries? Unless they're doing something like, committing a crime inside of that country. And then even still, do they have some form of immunity? I don't have the answer to those questions. Mm-hmm. But in my experience of Trumpdom, again, they're not great at governance. They're not policy people. They're not strategy people. They aren't very good decision makers. So I would be concerned if I was an ICE agent and I'm operating outside of the U.S. I would want to know what my legal protections are. That's all that I'm saying. Because you don't know what different countries are going to use in their toolboxes, Kris. Different countries, different size countries, they all have things that they can do to fight back. For instance, say with China in this whole silver situation, we have to now figure out different ways to get silver resources because China's blocking us from the traditional ways we got our silver resources. So there are different ways that each country can fight back. Wow, this situation is just so ridiculous and so out of control, Kris. Like, I've stopped saying, people like me, when we go back in, we got to fix things. I don't even know what that's going to look like. Mm-hmm. Fix what? I don't know what's going to be left after all of this is said and done. And honestly, I'm going to keep it very honest with you. There are people on our side. They are kind of secretly admiring how Trump and them are going through with a wrecking ball and doing the things that they thought can never be done. I've heard them say this. Like, it breaks my heart. Mm-hmm. But I've argued from the beginning, one of the reasons why Trump starting with DEI was so successful is because a lot of people didn't like DEI. You know what I'm saying? So if some people are wondering, like, why isn't there a stronger reaction here and there? Maybe because some people actually like the fact that there are less immigrants in the country. They would never want to say that out loud.
Yeah, I think that you're right, that there are people who quietly and perhaps even subconsciously admire what Trump has done in some of these abuses of power. And I think specifically about the purge of government employees, across the entire federal government, the ending of DEI policies, and what I think is pretty convincingly a very concerted campaign to purge the federal government of black women. That seems very deliberate to me. And I think that a lot of folks who don't interact with the government all the time, especially the federal government, and just, it's DC to them. It's another planet.
Yeah.
I think that they think of DC as an extension of their experience at the DMV, from a decade or 2 decades ago. So I think that there are many Americans who haven't had the privileges that we have had to get an inside look at how the federal government works and how policymaking works and how constituent affairs works and all of these, how much power an intern in a Congressional Hill office, who works there for 6 weeks, how much power that intern who's not getting paid might have to improve or save someone's life, or through neglect cause them ruin. I think that a lot of people just see the DMV when they look at the federal government, and that is why they may be, even subconsciously, appreciative of the fact that there are shakeups, with big air quotes going on. And is it possible for us to communicate to folks who just don't have that experience what it is like without sounding elitist, without lecturing in a way that causes a defensive reaction and makes them not want to listen to us anymore? The people who listen to this podcast are coming to this for a reason. It's long-term discussions or long-form discussions with policy experts, with historians, right? So this audience is different than America as a whole. But I think the answer to this question is important for everyone who's listening. Anyone who's choosing to listen at least 45 minutes at least into this podcast, if they're still listening, they're the type who knows what's going on and they care. How do we, as the name of the show is called, go on offense to help people understand how complicated government actually is? What service is beyond wearing a uniform like I did for a few years in the military? How do we educate people on that without them putting their walls up?
I love that question. And I'm sitting here listening to the question and I'm chuckling because this is how I describe my time at State. I'm going to forget the name of this Tom Hanks movie when he played this congressman who got all this money for Afghanistan when Russia went in. And there's this line from the guy from the CIA when he says, Tom Hanks asks him, well, how many guys are working on it? He's like, me and 2 other guys. Like, that's really how it is. And like this idea that there's way too many government employees. And, I think that there's bloat. There's definitely bloat in areas of the federal government. But when we're talking about I'll speak from my experience at Department of State. So being on the International Security Advisory Board, my job was, the board was situated inside of what's called the T Bureau. And basically the T Bureau is kind of like the defense wing of Department of State. Okay. So we handle these really, really big questions, and everyone in the Bureau would be asked, like, what's the one thing that you need help with solving? And we would get that question as a board, and we would get put into little groups and go off and figure out how to fix this big problem. Briefing after briefing after briefing, especially with our regional bureau folks, every office was understaffed, Kris. Mm-hmm. It was every single office was like me and that other guy, you know. And I have no reason to, you know, I have no reason other than to tell the truth about that, because it's one of the things, you know, one of the policy suggestions is, wait a minute, like, you know, when you do a deep dive here and you bring in, you know, you want to collaborate and you want to do all these things to like help answer these really big questions. They're just, people aren't around and they're not available, you know, mm-hmm. And that was my experience. So this idea that federal employees are just kind of like, you know, there's just way too many of us and, you know, and the job isn't getting done. None of that is true. Mm-hmm. The Biden administration was actually very effective foreign policy wise. They kept a lot at bay. And what we're seeing now, I think people are starting to actually understand that. So being part of an effective government and seeing what it takes, the people power, the dedication, those people were stretched. My friends at the White House, Kris, let me tell you something. Between Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, and those are just the big splashy ones. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's just be honest about that. There are the people, you know, working in different theaters all around the world, and they all have their unique challenges, right? Mm-hmm. So all of this work was getting done, and now it is a FUBAR. It is a complete and utter mess.
Yeah.
And people were barely hanging on under good governance. So what's going to be left when they're done? I have no damn clue.
Yeah. So you and I are both part of the Truman National Security mm-hmm. Project, which for folks who haven't heard of it before, it's a liberal or left-leaning progressive think and do tank. It's not just about issuing policy proposals, policy papers, which is something that, you and I do. But it is about connecting the doers with one another. And I've been a member of that organization. I was inducted into class of 2016. So I got to see the trauma of, and it is accurate to describe as trauma, the trauma of State Department employees, people who had good things going under the good governance of the Obama administration, walk into the wood chipper of the first Trump administration. And then, there was 4 years of chaos. These things like the travel ban and everything else. It takes a toll on people who care about this stuff and who are working on it and staking their reputations on the success of the programs they're working on. We came into the Biden administration already collectively as a country exhausted by COVID. And then there was the fall of Afghanistan. And then there was the invasion, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then there was Gaza. I wonder if, and we have seen this organization, and it's been publicly reported, it is not as strong as it used to be. It is not as influential as it used to be. And I think that is primarily due to the burnout of this community. Yeah. And we're just a teeny tiny part of it, right? We're just I think there's a few hundred members globally, but we represent millions of people who work in national security and policy and politics, both domestically and abroad. do you think that we are going to have the energy to put things back together again? Or do you think that this, and you've said this a couple times about us not being a global superpower, do you think that the exhaustion of the good people who've been doing this work for their entire lives is going to lead to this lack of being a global superpower? Do you think that that we won't have the energy to put things back together again?
Yes and no. And we are being confronted on multiple fronts. You know, one of the other disgusting, unique features of this administration, it's beyond being poor decision makers and horrible at governance. It's the retribution part of it, right? So you say for instance, you know, me sitting here with my background. So the International Security Advisory Board was dissolved under the Trump administration. Okay, that's fine. But then, you know, the thinking is, okay, but you can go off into industry. You can get picked up, you know, in industry. Nope. With the anti-DEI, you know, it gives, in my personal opinion, people and organizations permission to do the thing that they probably wanted to do a long time ago anyway, you know. So we're not being picked up in industry. We are being punished as the 92% who voted overwhelmingly for the Black and Asian lady, right? And the same thing is happening in civil society. So where we have to fight the good fight, we have to, you know, fight the ground fight, we have to message, you know, we have to do all of these things, fight for resources, fight for money. And on top of having to fight for resources, fight for money, the Trump administration is making it hard for the funders to even give us the money. So it's compounded. So we are exhausted from different directions. You know, it's one thing to go out there and do the policy work, to do, you know, to do the groundwork when it comes to, you know, different elections and stuff like that. But when the traditional sources of funding is being threatened by the administration, and or the funders have decided to stop funding because they're still pissed about the last election, and or they are trying to figure out what this landscape is going to look like, it's a hot mess right now. So the exhaustion is just going to come from wanting and needing a win, Kris. You know, like Trump has been, I remember Foreign Policy for America, Representative Greg Meeks spoke. And he said, you know, the first Trump administration, I was able to tell, you know, counterparts, oh, that's an aberration. Don't worry about it. We won't make that decision twice, right? And he says how folks were reluctant, but they were like, okay, we'll give you this one, right? And then it happened again. And he said, I don't know what to tell our partners and allies anymore. And that scared the hell out of me, because it made it feel really, really real. If you don't know, I for damn sure don't know. Yeah.
And again, you know, people hear us laughing because it's not because it's funny, but because it is maddening is actually the perfect phrase. It is maddening. You know, it is. I am someone who, when I get severely hurt, I broke my collarbone when I was a kid twice. You know, I've broken other bones. I laugh when I'm hurting.
I can do too.
And I feel like I'm doing that kind of laugh more often, not from physical wounds, but from the emotional and psychological toll of the reality that we live in today. So as tough as everything that we're talking about is, it's worth repeating. My listeners have heard this before, that we're in it because we still think we can win. Otherwise, we'd go home. right? So what is it that gives you hope about this moment that keeps you getting up in the morning, turning on the camera, producing content, in addition to teaching and in addition to the public speaking gigs and all of that? What is energizing you? What is keeping you in the fight?
Well, I mean, damn, Kris, I'm Black in America. Hell, I mean, it's in my damn DNA.
That's a good answer.
It's Sunday. But honestly, though, yes, it's some of that. And the beautiful thing that's come out of all of this, as I sit here, with my new network mate, like in this horrible time, people are being drawn back together in ways in which we were just kind of in our silos, especially after COVID, so the different types of communities and the different types of bonds, that is powerful in my personal opinion. It's my different communities that, first of all, let me know that I am not alone in my thinking. I am not alone, right? And having people around you that are, we don't have to think the same, but if our missions are aligned, then I'll rock with you. You know what I'm saying? Like if our missions are aligned, then let's go, let's do this. But it really is what I see as hopeful. The Americans that are fighting back. One of the reasons why this administration looks so clumsy is because they were thinking that the American public were going to do the same things as the law firms, as the universities. We did not do that. We are not shutting up. We are still here, and we are louder, and we are more committed to the mission than before, because everything that we said, FO, here we are. And then it's more extreme, it's more intense, right? So a lot of the stuff that we were trying to warn people about, they're seeing and they're feeling and they're experiencing, and they're having a hard time trying to name it, right? That's where we come in, right? As the messengers, right? Which has a very strong role throughout history, biblically and historically. I'm a huge fan of James Baldwin. And let me not get too far into that, but our role in this, Kris, is very important. And I felt that when my mom was still alive, when Russia invaded Ukraine. And at that time, I was all over media, and that's unusual for a Black woman to talk about, you're going to war. And I understood in that moment that this responsibility was just that. It was a responsibility, and I take it very seriously. And I'm happy to be in company with people like you who also take this mission very seriously. I didn't spend 15 years in school becoming a political scientist because I don't believe in democracy.
How is it that the average listener can go on offense in a way that supports the things that you care about, and that supports you in the work that you're doing? Well,
we'll have an announcement here soon. I hope I can come back and say that announcement where you can support, but going to put a pin in that for right now. But I am really focusing a lot on my Substack Security Brief. I really want to build that out, because on Security Brief, I do deep dives into current security challenges, and I do kind of like the boring thing, like reading like the national security strategy, and it's kind of like, this is like a 101 course, so that's what I do on Security Brief. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at Nola Haynes. I keep it very simple. Also on Blue Sky at Nola Haynes. But I'm excited for the work that we're all going to be doing together very soon, and I can't wait for those announcements to be made.
Where can people read your work?
Well, thank you for asking. My most recent work, I have 3 works coming out this year in the beginning of 2027. One, they're all on space security, which is my day job. That's my research world through the lens of arms control and international security. So one is in a foreign policy book. So that's a progressive foreign policy book that's coming out this year. One, it's on my own original theoretical ideas that I'm contributing to the space security canon. And then the other is from the perspective of being a Black woman political scientist in my research area. So all about space security, but from 3 different perspectives. So I'm very excited about that, and I will give you updates when those publications are coming out.
Great. And to find you on Substack, it is #SecurityBrief?
#SecurityBrief, yes.
Great. All right. Well, if you're listening to this, you need to go on to Substack and subscribe.
Because you made it this far, I know you understand what's at stake. Dr. Haynes laid it out clearly. America is in a moment of collapse, not just in our institutions, but in our credibility. Abroad, we're seen as unstable. At home, we're becoming unrecognizable. That's not something we can fix with another election cycle or a new president. We need something deeper. We need a reckoning. And a reckoning isn't just about punishment. It's about walking the talk and living our stated values. It's about looking at who we've been, what we've done in the name of power, and what we've allowed to happen in our name, and deciding whether we're ready to be something better, whether we can rebuild not just trust in government, but trust in each other. And here's the hard part. We're not going to go through that reckoning alone. Whether we like it or not, we're part of a global community. Our superpower status isn't guaranteed anymore. In a lot of places, the United States isn't trusted with power. And frankly, it's going to take a generation or more to earn back what trust we used to have. If we want a future where America still has a voice that matters, where we can be seen as a partner instead of as a threat, we're going to have to do more than apologize. We're going to have to negotiate, rebuild, and prove ourselves again and again. And we're going to have to hold ourselves accountable and become a nation whose foundation is the rule of law. That's what On Offense is about. Not just holding the line, but moving it forward. Thanks for listening. On Offense is produced by Gina Kim as part of the VALOR Media Network. To support this show and the organizing behind it, subscribe at onoffense.substack.com. That's where you'll find essays, action guides, and bonus content to help you go on offense in your own community. One of the most recent articles for the On Offense Substack is an instructional on how you can safely observe ICE from a vehicle. I'll soon be publishing a version of that on taskforcebutler.org as well. And if you're getting something out of this show, please share this, rate it, post about it, talk to the people in your life about these discussions. That's how we build power. That's how we fight back. Let's go on offense, and I'll see you next time.